Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, June 3rd, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America. Downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, activist, author, documentary filmmaker Astra Taylor on her new book, Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. Also on the program today, 12 victims and shooter dead, the latest mass shooting. DOJ and FTC looking at Google over antitrust issues. Poll shows impeachment rising as the third most powerful Democrat in Congress. Clyburn says impeachment is now inevitable. Meanwhile, Trump in the UK, being Trump in the UK. And new report, the Affordable Care Act helped to reduce racial disparities, particularly in cancer treatments. Democratic hopefuls in California focus on Biden, while some abandon small donors. And the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service reports that the Trump tax cuts flopped, unless you are already super rich. Time to take back that Arthur Laffer Medal of Freedom. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is another week. We are already in June. Sort of shocking that we are here. Just a reminder for what we've got coming up in this month. We have at least two Democratic debates. Well, no, two Democratic debates. They'll be back-to-back. The first half of the 22 candidates, or 25 or 27, 35 candidates will go up on one night, and then the other half on the other night. Of course, not everyone will make those two debates. And it's unclear to me at this point, and I'm not sure if it's public even, it'll be determined who's on what stage. I believe that that's going to be very, very important in terms of impacting this race. There was a report out. Theodore Johnson was writing about this from the Brennan Center in the Washington Post. A lot of Joe Biden's support from African Americans basically comes down to a function that they believe he can win. And African Americans, black people, have a very, very strong interest in getting rid of Donald Trump in a way that other people may. Well, I don't know how you compare that, but the sense of potential for backsliding on issues of race and civil rights is a major factor in the determination as to whether they will support Joe Biden, largely just as a function of whether he can win. There are obviously other attributes, but this is a prominent one. And it's not inconsistent with what we've seen in the past. The support for Barack Obama in the black community was very, very low until he won in Iowa. in 2007. And that's when you started to see Clinton's support, I wouldn't say crater, but certainly diminish, and people going to Obama when there was a sense that he could win. So one of the things that I think is going to be play a huge role with Joe Biden is either the emergence of someone else who can be seen as winning as easily as Joe Biden, or Joe Biden being seen to be less invincible. And one of those things is going to be, I think, momentum coming out of the debates and really what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire, those first two states. So we shall see. Also, I just want to get to just two corrections and a little one other thing here. One is, yesterday we headlined a story that a senior North Korean official who was ostensibly the envoy to the U.S. talks was killed, and that there was some type of purge. There are now reports saying that that purge was not accurately reported, that maybe it didn't happen at all. It's unclear. But certainly it turned out, I don't know if that was a hoax or what the deal was, or if there were other people who may have been purged and not. There was talk that there were multiple people purged, but it is clear that Kim Young Chol, who was Mike Pompeo's counterpart with the United States, was not purged. He's been showing up in public. At the time, I have to say kudos to Brendan, because when Brendan first heard that story, he said, "This is weird. Why would Un admit that he screwed up in any way by taking it out, even if it was to blame other people?" So let that correction stand. Also, we played a clip on Friday, I think it was on Friday, of a reporter from Inside Edition questioning a pastor on the purchase of whose plane was it? Was it
Tyler Perry's.
Tyler Perry's plane, and why you had to buy it, because it was just Tyler Perry made it so cheap.
You made it so cheap.
I had to buy it. I mean, I had to. We neglected to mention the name of the reporter. It was Lisa Guerrero. She is a reporter with Inside Edition. Does apparently a lot of work like that, and so. If you have kudos for that interview, make sure that you reach out to her. We've put a link in yesterday's YouTube thing, and maybe we should put that in today as well to her Twitter feed.
I'm going to say it right now. Kudos for that interview.
There you go. And I'll probably get into this a little bit later, but I got some response. And I'm curious what people think about this, that I wasn't actually hard enough on Steven Crowder for his blatant homophobia and his...
I'll take some of the rap. I didn't know that he was a AIDS crisis denialist. He has multiple videos of like the AIDS crisis was like that it affected gay people so bad is basically exaggerated.
I didn't know that at all either.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing.
That's like some Holocaust denial level shit right there.
And I don't want to spend too much time on this right now because we've got to get to our guest, but just briefly, when I look at that, I see somebody doing something similar to what I'm doing, just, without the content, but just sort of the shell, the structure. And I was just like sort of flabbergasted, like, how does an adult actually do this in 2019? How does like an adult person do this and do it in public as a job? And I think on some level, like I was just, because I don't think the guy from Vox, who Crowder is basically, I don't know, say gay bashing, but gay, I mean, sort of, right? I mean, at least rhetorically. He doesn't care about Steven Crowder, and I mean, he's a fully grown adult, and but the thing that I started to think about, and based on some criticism that I got, Crowder is clearly aiming his show at kids. And by kids, I mean like teens, right? And I think that's become much more clear to me. He is exploiting their ignorance and their youth and whatnot. That's why he can go and debate college students, and it doesn't make it look, people don't, his audience doesn't look at him like this. And it's also probably on some reason why they have the whole cigar and sophisticated liquor thing, because frankly, as a 12 or 13-year-old boy, I can tell you, like, that looks like what an adult does.
Man babies.
Yes.
Yeah, and college students look like grown-ups.
Right, exactly. And
do you remember the campaign we were going to do with you?
well, wait a second. So let me just get through this. And so, but the thing that is really, when you become aware of that, he is going on, and not only, I can't remember the report, and certainly writings, the things like Will and Grace, that sitcom, which I never watched really, but I didn't watch any of them, frankly. But the implications of that, if you're a 12-year-old boy living in in some rural area or some parts of the country where gay people had not been accepted, during that era. We're huge in terms of what it's saying, that, like, look, regardless of what you're going through now, and that in society at large, you will be accepted. And literally Crowder's doing the opposite. And it's, I don't know if Crowder is aware of this, but teen suicide rates for kids who are gay, for kids who are transgender or feel that they, are not living that they are not the gender they were born with or assigned to, is real. Teen suicide rates, they're high, and it's a real phenomenon. And to mainstream and legitimize and frankly encourage that type of gay bashing, it should never have been acceptable. But particularly, now when there is, we are hopefully several decades away, multiple decades away from some measure of enlightenment, is really reprehensible. It's just disgusting. And so I didn't mean to soft pedal that, and maybe we can talk more about it in the second half of the program. But it really is gross. But it's beyond gross. It's horrific in many ways. And I think I found it so hard to absorb in this day and age, that you would do a show that, a staple of which is just the out and out gay bashing is pretty stunning.
The producer's name is not Gay Jared.
I know. It's just
everywhere
so
in this
juvenile.
show. It's crazy.
But it's the point I guess I'm making is, like, to me, it just struck me as so juvenile. But then I was like, but it's worse than juvenile, because he's not a juvenile, and he is a role model for juveniles. And that's what makes it so horrific.
Hey, man, you got to meet those 14-year-old boys where they are.
Yeah, I guess so. You could probably do it with video games. Folks, you may think that you don't need life insurance yet, but if you have loved ones who depend on you, you need to have a plan. I certainly never thought about life insurance until my kids were born. My daughter was born. I ended up getting some term life insurance that's got her covered well past. I went further than college for her, because I anticipated a second child. Didn't realize it'd be such a gap. But I still got him under the wire. So he's covered through college, if that's what he wants to do. But it's intimidating if you've never even contemplated. Thankfully, Ethos makes doing the responsible thing easy. With Ethos, you can get covered in like 10 minutes. You can even sign up right from your phone. There's no pesky paperwork, no pushy salespeople. You just choose a policy that fits your needs. You don't waste time deciphering the fine print, because Ethos treats you like a person, not a risk. They work with you to make sure you have the right policy for your lifestyle and your budget. They have a dedicated customer support team that's right here in the United States, and they help with any questions you might have. Visit ethoslife.com. Click on Check My Price to get started on the quick online application. You can insure your life today by going to ethoslife.com/majority to apply online. Insuring your life and providing your family with financial security has never been easier. That's Ethos, ETHOS, life.com/majority, and you're 10 minutes away from your estimated rate. Make sure your family's future is safe no matter what. That's ethoslife.com/majority. Also, there's many times, particularly when I'm not with the children, where I forget to eat dinner, I don't want to go out, boom, whatever it is. You realize 8 a.m., you need a breakfast burrito. You need some red wine, 4 p.m., sometimes maybe in the middle of the afternoon, depending on what's going on. Kids drive you crazy. Ibuprofen or whatever it is in the morning or at night. You got a headache, Michael? Maybe you like peppermint.
Maybe some peppermint essential oil.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Well, Postmate it. Postmates is your personal food delivery, grocery delivery, whatever kind of delivery service all year round. No more trips to the store. Anything you're craving, Postmates can deliver within the hour. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I don't know how they do this. The largest on-demand network in the U.S., they offer delivery from all the restaurants, grocery, convenience stores, traditional retailers you could possibly need. Simply download the app for iOS or Android for free, browse local restaurants and businesses, and track your delivery in real time. And for a limited time, Postmates is giving our listeners $100 of free delivery credit for your first 7 days when you use the code REPORT. That's the code REPORT for $100 of free delivery credit for your first 7 days when you download the Postmates app. Try it out, folks. This is the time to do it. Anything you need, anytime you need it, Postmate it. Download Postmates and save with the code REPORT. Lastly, we don't all have the opportunity to go to a silent retreat for a week.
But some of us need it.
Some of us need it, but we don't all have that luxury. Well, the World Health Organization's named the health epidemic of the 21st century. Do you know what it is?
I'm going to guess that it is stress.
Yes, exactly. Tremendous amount of stress in our lives every day. Michael's super calm, but that's why we're partnering with Calm. It's the number one rated app for meditation. When you meditate, your brain chemistry changes. Michael came in here, he's like completely, almost too chill.
He's floating.
Yeah,
like
he's floating
2 inches
around.
above
Well,
his
we had the
feet.
very opposite of a silent retreat
Yeah,
last
exactly.
week.
Yeah, you guys, don't worry. As soon as I saw the DiGiorno tweet, I was back.
Now, Michael, you probably know this because they probably told you, but meditation has been shown to slow down the release of stress chemicals into your bloodstream,
Indeed.
like cortisol and adrenaline.
Yes.
Gives you much needed relief. With Calm, you'll discover a whole library of simple guided meditations on themes like anxiety, creativity, and focus. They even have other resources to help you relax, like sleep stories. That's what I like. Music and more. I found those sleep stories are pretty good. I can't do the one with the the lavender fields, but anything else is good.
You'll get a psychosomatic reaction.
Exactly. Good night, Hachu. So if you're stressed, take a deep breath and get calm. Right now, Majority Report listeners get 25% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/majority. That's Calm, CALM.com/majority. 40 million people have downloaded Calm. Find out why at calm.com/majority. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Astra Taylor about her book, Democracy May Not Exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program activist, author, documentary filmmaker. Latest film is What is Democracy, out with Zeitgeist Films. And the book, the companion book, Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. Astra Taylor, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
This is low-hanging fruit in terms of a question, but I guess it is. I have to ask, what is democracy?
Oh my God, you got me. No, I mean, what is democracy? It's interesting to flash back to when I first started filming the documentary and imagine myself being put in the position of the people I stopped on the street. What would have been my answer then?
When did you start? When did you start shooting the documentary?
So I wrote the proposal for it all the way back in 2013 and got the green light and started filming in 2015. So, I would say democracy is the rule of the people, the demos of democracy. The demos have kratos, which is, power, to go back to the ancient Greek. And of course the Greeks didn't invent the process of democracy, but they gave us that word. And I think it's a powerful word, this idea that the people rule. I also like Aristotle's definition, which is democracy is ruled by the poor, because the poor are always more numerous than the rich, right? And so if we're talking about the majority making decisions, then it's not rich people, it's not oligarchy. So that's a nice way of just drawing a line between what democracy should be in the situation we have today.
Let's talk a little bit about your experience at Occupy, because I would imagine on some level the idea of this, if not necessarily inspired out of Occupy, but was at least informed, and so your experience there. But just talk to us about that, because that was, it seems to me that, well, I just start with that, and then I just want to talk about, why Occupy happened when it happened.
Yeah, I think Occupy Wall Street, so fall of 2011, it was a response to a movement around the world calling for real democracy. So, it was inspired by the Arab Spring, and there was the movement of the squares in Europe and in places like Greece and Spain and well beyond. And so I got involved in the Occupy movement. In fact, I co-founded a union for debtors called the Debt Collective that is still active, and I recommend people check it out. The idea is to use debt as a form of economic leverage to change our financial system. But that, Occupy was a movement that I think was rightfully criticizing the status quo at that moment, right? The banks had gotten bailed out, the people had gotten sold out, the system we have is not democratic. It put the issue of class front and center, the 1% versus the 99%. So I think Occupy was a real game changer in many ways. And yet it was sort of in its DNA committed to a vision of democracy that was direct as opposed to representative. And this, in the beginning, was really beautiful because you'd have these mass general assemblies sort of at dusk, and people were using the human microphone, and it was very powerful, but it was not a functional mode of running the movement, let alone running the whole society. So I think what Occupy did for me was to go, okay, well, hold on, we're talking about democracy, but what do we mean? We know what we're against. We're against the concentration of wealth. We're against the exploitation of the environment. We're against the idea in Citizens United that money is speech. But what do we mean by the word? And I realized how little we had to fall back on in terms of basic political theory and philosophy. I mean, most people had a kind of like middle school, high school operating, level of understanding of sort of civics, right? And so it threw me back on this question: what do we mean by democracy? What do we want? That led me to make this film and to write the companion book.
When we talk about it as being, a democracy as being ruled by the people, my experience, I guess my sense of what was happening at Occupy at the time was that, all of these type of these type of events, or not events, but just sort of like this phenomenon, have like a half-life, and on some level that half-life, I think, was sped up, frankly, by Michael Bloomberg and maybe some coordination across the country of tactics. But be that as it may, part of the problem was, on some level, was sort of like, it was very difficult to deal. I remember going down there and having friends tell me, like, we're having real problem with this committee or that committee because it's being dominated by two or three people, which was ironic, right? That it's that democratic, but there ends up being people who sort of, I don't know, take more of the slice of democracy in that moment, and there's just a different type of currency. How? Go ahead.
No, I like your phrase, the half-life. To me, I went down to Occupy, in the first day and hung around those early weeks, and I thought, okay, this is going to burn itself out, right? This has a sort of inner clock that's going to reach its end. So I'm very surprised that we're talking about it today, years after the fact. But there was something in that commitment to direct democracy and to democracy by consensus. There was a fatal flaw, which you just put your finger on, which is when you're operating by consensus, then a small number of people can veto. They have incredible veto power. And so what seems like it's going to be, utopian and democratic actually turns into its opposite, because it becomes a sort of dictatorship of the grumpy few, or maybe people who are there to derail things purposefully. So, what I took away from that, so the book is set up as an investigation into the contradictions or tensions that I think are at the heart of democracy. And, so the entire book is very much attuned to the question of economics, the fact that we do we live in a situation with intense concentration of wealth, and attention to the fact that capitalism is, I would say, inherently undemocratic in the sense that it concentrates wealth, it concentrates power, it concentrates ownership, right? So then how can you have people ruling themselves as equals? But with that, so that's a sort of thread through the whole book. But each chapter is about a paradox. So one of them is the tension between consensus and conflict, right? Like, when do we aim for a total agreement in a group, or when do we just say, okay, our differences are irreconcilable and we're going to have to fight it out? There's not, a one size fits all answer for every situation. So the book looks at these things, these tensions that make democracy just really difficult to actually enact. So we can give a simple definition: democracy is the people rule, but how we actually do that requires a whole robust system of supports. It requires constant reevaluation and reassessment, and we have to hold these things in balance. Like, when do we aim to all agree and have a unanimous decision, and when do we just say, okay, that's not going to happen, we're going to have to use adversarial procedures to make it through?
Why do you think? There is the fact that Occupy happened at that time, right? That there was like it sort of felt, it was certainly in the air. I remember, just in 2010 trying to pitch people on the idea right now is sort of insider, outsider, like establishment, non-establishment, that there was a sense of like so many people had been left out of even the supposed solution to this calamity, and mostly people who were responsible for it were able to sort of like, they were the first people to turn around and go, oh, I've got the fix for this. But it seemed like there was a lag time. What do you think accounts for that timing? And there was a lot of things happening in that fall. Was it that people were getting inspired by each other, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lag time. When I hear you say there was a lag time, I'm thinking there's a lag time in terms of responding to the financial crisis. I mean, I think we're still living in the aftermath of 2008, 2009, and so for me, Occupy was, on the one hand, it was like totally necessary in the sense that in those years immediately after the banking sector implodes, exactly as you say, the people there to put it back together again are the people responsible for it, and they're getting these massive bonuses. And then the folks agitating in the streets are the Tea Party, right? And that just was so ridiculous, egregious. And so, people had been feeling the squeeze. They'd been feeling, an economic pinch, right? We had been we all know that since the 70s, wages have stagnated. We've been covering up for that stagnation with, easy access to credit. So people were deeply indebted. And so I think on some level, it's like, okay, something like Occupy had to happen. But I think it needed that global context of all these other movements in order to sort of motivate people to take this step that seemed kind of ridiculous, which is like, okay, let's all go hang out in a park, which is not it's not a strategy that can transform the system, but was a strategy that got attention, and I think did, it's kind of a cliche to say it, but change the conversation. I think the question is, what people need to do once that conversation is shifted, right? So that's sort of the problem of democracy that we're in now, which is, how do you actually build power for the people? How do you transform democracy? And what I say in the introduction of the book is, the challenge of the late 19th and 20th centuries the challenge of democracy was extending the franchise and franchising all of these people, all these populations who had been excluded by formal democracy. I think the challenge for our time is extending democracy beyond that limited political sphere into other arenas of our lives, democratizing the economy above all. And that is a strategic challenge that, something like Occupy was pointing towards the need for that, but didn't have the tactics or the strategy to actually do it. Yeah.
Do you think there? I mean, and then I want to move forward from this too, but because the whole phenomena I think is interesting. Do you think that there is a set of strategy and tactics out there that Occupy could have grown into, or had adopted, that would have had a different historical arc? I mean, I've asked myself this many, many times, particularly, or was that simply like that had to happen, it had to end, and then you have people like yourself who go out into the debt collective, but it also turned into sort of like, I think you could find a lot of people who are involved in Occupy in DSA groups around the country. Yeah. Bernie Sanders, I think 2016 campaign doesn't happen if it was not for what Occupy injected into the bloodstream. I mean, I think there's a myriad of things like that where sort of the fallout creates all different types of movements, as it were. Or do you think there was like a set of strategies at one point that that could have been followed? That could have. I mean, I think the committee on that gave feedback on the 21st Century Glass-Steagall. People consider that document on what to do with the banks to be the most comprehensive and prepared document that came in, period, from anywhere. Yeah. And so, how would you answer that question?
I basically agree with your your summary of that it kind of had to go the way it did, because I think there were lots of us who were involved in Occupy essentially not because we totally agreed with its anarchist tactics, but because it was the thing addressing the economic crisis, right? So you don't get to just pull the perfect movement out of your purse, right? You have to go where the people are. I at the time wished there was a kind of speedier evolution, and I think there were these signs. The Occupy the SEC group who did the Volcker letter, I think that's what you're referring to. Other groups that were focused on foreclosures and home evictions, I thought those were really promising. But there was definitely a resistance to making demands of the state, to like collaborating with unions. And so I think there's a big shift right now, and you put your finger on it. The people who have gone into the Bernie campaign, who've gone into DSA, in a way, the work we're doing with the Debt Collective, we're saying, okay, we have to make demands. We have to make demands of the state. We have to make demands of our financial institutions. We have to not just be ungovernable, but actually to try to govern, to remake the machine that's running over all of us, right? To not only just be the resistance, right, but to try to be a real force in this world. And I think it's a tough process because the left was so obliterated. I mean, that's why I was sympathetic to Occupy. There weren't organizations for young people to join to learn how to do the hard work of organizing. Unions are weak in this country, right? So people don't have that tradition to fall back on. So I'm happy that we are that protest energy hasn't totally dissipated, and that it does seem like people are learning from the sort of problems of Occupy, and hopefully, the thing is now we'll just have new problems to contend with because they never go away.
All right, one last question about Occupy, just because I'm sort of fascinated. But like when I think back in 2011, and we actually took the show down there, I think on the the first Monday, maybe, which was after the weekend, and maybe it was raining, or maybe it was the first Friday, and we couldn't do it because it was raining. But we were back down there, and as far as I can tell, even then, which is only now 8 years ago, people were not. There was not a lot of talk necessarily. I mean, there was some talk of anarchists there a little bit, but not hugely, and but there was not even a lot of talk about like socialists, and just in terms of socialism and how it has become an identifier that primary candidates in the Democratic primary 8 years later are like afraid of almost saying like, I'm not socialist, that's a contentious thing to say now. What was your sense of that being there? I mean, and because I think you were there a lot more than I was during that time, just physically. But do you think that opened the door? I mean, I feel like that time was like a hinge, and maybe it was a generational thing, or I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say two things on that, because I think it definitely did open the door. When I think back to the, what could have happened sort of thought experiment of Occupy, to me, the failure isn't with the occupiers, who again were stepping into this void, right? This void of the left and doing what they could. They had images of people protesting in the streets, so they protested in the streets, To me, it was a failure of the establishment to recognize what was going on in that moment and respond to it with force and conviction, right? Because what you saw at Occupy was exactly what you just said, which is, these people were not like diehard anarchists or necessarily always people with a sort of coherent left-wing ideology. They were people whose houses had been foreclosed on, who were drowning in medical debt because some tragedy had befallen their family, who had gone to school like they'd been told to do their whole lives and are weighted down with unpayable student loans. I mean, this was a massive indication of the discontent that we're still dealing with today, right? So to me, I think the problem wasn't with the movement itself. It's the fact that the the people with power just actually couldn't metabolize it, and just wanted to continue to stick their heads in the sand. I think that I never would have guessed that democratic socialism would become words that were sayable in the mainstream the way that they are now. I think there were definitely individuals there who were, identified as socialists or democratic socialists. I mean, but what I think we could not have foreseen is that would actually catch on. I think the Bernie campaign is absolutely part of that. I think the left can't take all the credit for the rise of socialism, because one thing is, part of it is just the abject failure of capitalism to provide for people's basic needs, right? So, and so when you have a generation that is in debt for their education, that can't find stable employment, that doesn't think they're ever going to be able to retire, that sees a climate catastrophe on the horizon, they're going to start doubting the system that they've been told is the be all and end all of human capacity. So I think part of the credit goes to the failure of capitalism, and also to the fact that the right has branded just basic social services as socialism, right? So we're in a point where, if Fox News is going to go around and say, hey, being able to go to a doctor is socialism, then it starts to sound pretty good. Right. So I think all these factors are playing in, and I think the left actually needs to catch up and seize this moment. We can't actually take we shouldn't take all the credit for it. It's like what there is there's sort of shift. There's an opening. We're still in that hinge moment as you described it. And can we actually organize it? And this goes back to, this is part of why I was thinking through these issues in my book and my film, because I think this is a moment where, crises have always led to a kind of renaissance of thinking. And this happens all throughout political philosophy, where there's some sort of emergency or civil war or conflict, and new ideas come about. And we're kind of in that moment now where, because there was this massive financial crisis and the rise of the right, I think people are they're questioning things, they're questioning everything. And I think we need to nurture that questioning instead of going into an easy nostalgia, whether it's the nostalgia of the right who wants to make America great again, or the nostalgia of the sort of centrist democratic establishment who just wants to make it 2015 again.
Moving, I guess, forward, at least through your book to a certain extent, I'm sort of interested in this sort of and you set up these different dynamics, like you said, the tension between expertise and mass opinion, and you write about the anti-tax revolt in California, which ended up with Proposition 13, and then as a kid, I remember when this was adopted by Massachusetts, like 3 or 4 years later, and just one year went to school and half the stuff was gone. Like, there was no more sports teams. There was no more, art class. And in California in particular, there's been, certainly through like the 80s and the 90s, there was this sort of, populism, I guess, right? Like that, but it was not, I don't know if it was necessary. It was driven by non-democratic forces, it seems to me. But where do you get that sort of like, talk a little bit about that tension between the sort of the expertise and the sort of mass opinion, which can be manipulable, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of those tensions, again, we can't resolve. I mean, one reason critics have always feared democracy, sort of elite critics, is that democracy, there's no barrier to entry. It's not like you have to have a democracy degree and then you get to participate. So I think democracy does always have this risk, right, that people will get swept up in the old idea of people having unruly passions and not being virtuous, and that democracy will sort of self-destruct. I mean, Plato in his famous text The Republic warns that democracy always devolves into tyranny. What I highlight in the film and the book is that he says that the conditions for that devolution are oligarchy, or the intense concentration of wealth, and what happens is, the city splits in two, and it's the rich versus the poor. And that's what creates conditions for these plutocrats or these elites to create these sort of faux populist moments, right, that we're kind of living through now. So I mean, I think we have to, in what I'm trying to do with the question of the debate, the tension between experts and sort of mass opinion, is to say that we have to work to create a philosophical public, right? And the risk of that argument is that there's almost this like cliche idea that education is what will save us. Often, if that's what I noticed going around with the film, when you'd say, okay, what's, you know, what how can we fix democracy? People would say education, and I try to be a bit more critical in the text and say education for what, right? What is the curriculum people are being taught? Whose interests are being served? There's a very moving scene in the documentary, which I should say that people can stream. It's streaming on iTunes and Amazon and on Canopy, which is a service most libraries have. But where I interview these kids from an inner city school in Miami, they're like 12 or 13, and essentially you realize that what the curriculum that they're getting, the democratic curriculum they're being taught, is one of basically being told not to engage democratically. So they recount the story where they're asking for the school to heat up their food. They want their lunches to be warm, and they're just completely crushed by the teachers. And so, you know, this one kid says very movingly, like, yeah, they talk about democracy, but they talk about sort of like government. They don't talk about us actually being able to have a voice in the school or us having power. So, you know, I think we need to sort of challenge the cliche that education is what will solve all of our problems. On the Prop 13 thing, I think, you know, I write about that at length because it's such an interesting example of effective activism, and the left doesn't pay attention. I don't think we pay attention enough to right-wing movements, and I look at it because, you know, it began as a genuine revolt in California where people were having trouble paying their property taxes. And so some people on fixed income, older people who had bought their houses long ago, started to lose them. And what happened is this sort of charlatan guy was able to mobilize around that genuine problem and yoke it to a sort of anti-tax ideology. And then Ronald Reagan, who's, you know, would incorporate this into his run for president. And it was sort of a foundational conservative move, and put anti-taxes actually on the national agenda. And why I admire the right as much as I disagree with their politics is that they understood that they shouldn't just refuse. They weren't just like, okay, we're going to refuse to pay our taxes. What they did was they remade the rules through a referendum, right? And they remade the modes of governing. And I think that's the step the left needs to look towards, to not just say, again, you know, resistance, or we'll be ungovernable, or we'll put our bodies in the way of the gears of the machine, but how can we actually tackle those structures of power? How can we actually remake the system so that it's more equitable and more democratic? And so it's actually in the chapter that's on the distinction between spontaneity and structure. Like, yes, democracy needs the spontaneous revolts and these moments of protest, like Occupy or you know, where we're in the streets, but we also need to structure our system to make it have outcomes that we want.
But that's sort of a central dilemma, isn't it? I mean, because what happened with Prop 13 was also very similar to what happened was basically the Tea Party movement in many respects, right? Yeah. I mean, it starts with this sort of like notion of like, we're not going to bail out the homeowners because, and sort of this energy that's out there, right? This maybe what is a legitimate anger is just subtly channeled, but the subtle channeling happens because there's someone with a tremendous amount of money who's basically like looking at this fertile, you know, piece of property and just sort of saying like, I'm going to seed over there and I'm going to seed over there. And then stuff grows there as opposed to where they don't seed with money. And there's no one on the left. There's not an analog on the left for that, where like, okay, we have all this energy. We're going to make it completely, it's going to be decentralized, the decision-making on as to, you know, that structure. It seems to me that money, what it ends up doing is it creates a structure without imposing one, and it allows a sort of central authority to sort of create that without it make it seem like it is being created, because it's just a matter of like, oh, well, people are going to, migrate to where the resources are. And that's where things are going to bloom, the areas that are getting watered, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, both of those things, those movements are definitely related. The tax revolts of the late 70s and 80s and the Tea Party. And it's true, like, we can't dismiss both of them as totally just nothing but AstroTurf. There was a genuine, there was a genuine component. And then you're absolutely right. Institutionalized money, or conservative think tanks and operatives were able to latch on and take that discontent and harness it to their goals, which is to dismantle the state. And they got a big return on investment, right? Because if you decimate taxes, that's money in your pocket. And so I think the left has more difficult conditions to grapple with on two fronts. One, we don't get that same return on investment, right? Because we're not companies just looking to lower our bills and get more money into our coffers. But I think we are trying to push the state to actually deliver social services. And so the right is just, gets to be nihilistic because they just want the state to shrink down to the point they can drown it in the bathtub, whereas we want the state to actually do good. So, we have a tougher road, but I do think that something like the tax revolt's instructive because there could have been different solutions offered to those homeowners in need. For example, could it have been that if you were on a fixed income, the law just said, okay, your property taxes actually, your property taxes hold tight, but, a company's property taxes are going to go up, right? Instead of treating every entity like it's the same as the law currently does. Could we have started a conversation about why our homes, the places we live, have to be speculative investments that we hope will rise in value, right? So why, that is part of the pathology of the American way, is that our house is our asset. I mean, and that led to the financial crisis of 2008, right? So why not talk about homes that are actually made for their use value to live in, as opposed to being an asset that appreciates? So decommodifying housing, social housing. And, so the left has to take some responsibility for not speaking to people's needs and not offering solutions that, might have shifted the conversation. And this is why, we have to get organized. We have to do that work because, it's a cliche, but it's true. It's like, yeah, they have money, but we have people. And the right has always feared that since the beginning of democracy, and they still do, which is why they're always trying to sort of rejig the rules and mitigate the power of numbers. So we have to do the hard work of democracy. It's not an easy thing. And writing this book convinced me of that even more. It's a challenge.
So how close are we to it being gone, and what is what's going to, or what could potentially replace it?
Oh, replace the system we have.
Democracy, as it were.
Yeah.
It's democracy on some level for us now is one part aspirational, multiple parts sort of like difficult to pin down, and but as you can. It when it's leaving, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's why I tried to get with the title, right? So the title of the book is Democracy May Not Exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone. To get to that, sort of to capture my own ambivalence, the fact that the system we live in is so far from what I believe a democracy is, and lots of studies bear this out, right? That regular people have almost no say over the policies that govern us. And yet we know when it's being taken away. We know when things are moving backwards. I mean, just look at the news around abortion in the last few weeks. I mean, it's like devastating to witness. I think that I know we're in a state of emergency, and I've been talking about how we need to get organized, and I do as much organizing as I can through my work with the Debt Collective and through being involved in electoral politics. But I also think we need to stop and think, right? And to actually reflect on this word that we hear all around us that is invoked by people who are anything but democratic. And that's why, I made the movie and wrote this book. It's like, I think if we are going to have a chance of fighting for democracy, revitalizing it, evolving it, expanding it beyond the limited political sphere into these other areas of our lives, then we have to think about what the word means. What does democracy mean? And it's striking to me how few of us do that, how little time we devote to it, to this word that's everywhere. So that, I think, would be my sort of first challenge or hope for people, is to actually reflect on this concept and what do we want from it, because that if we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to sort of make progress and deepen and expand it and to I think have a chance of getting us out of the mess we're in.
Astra Taylor, the book is Democracy May Not Exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone, and the film is What is Democracy? Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to both those at majority.fm. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. Going to head to the fun half in just a moment. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, not only do you support this the free part of the show, but you also get extra content every day. And you'll also find, when you get on the app, have this opportunity to search the Majority Report app, which is free to everybody. But you log in as a member, you'll be able to search all the way back. You can search Zuccotti Park. You can search Occupy Wall Street. Go back and listen to those early days when me and old Matt went down to Zuccotti Park with a battery-operated mixer and literally walked around like a one-man band. I had it all hanging off of me. It was hilarious. There's some videos, I think, of it too. But I was walking, holding a battery-operated mixer, and we were broadcasting through a phone or an iPad or something. Boy, have we upgraded, though, the technology. We have, actually. Now I could do that. It would sound broadcast quality almost. Come back to the zip here and pop it back out. But
I got to watch some of those.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it was rain, and then, of course, it was oh, shoot, I have the wrong cable, and then there was a lot of that. But we were down there early. I think on day, I think it started on a Friday, maybe a Saturday morning, and we were there on Monday morning, but it was raining, and then we came back on Friday. Do you remember? You weren't there yet?
I wasn't there yet, no. Mm-mm.
I was there.
No,
on the show.
I didn't work on the show yet.
Never mind.
But so folks can check that out.
Interview with Tim Pool, I'm finding.
Yes. Well, Tim Pool.
Oh my God.
No, I remember it.
Was the cameraman for a guy, I can't remember his name right now, who was actually, I want to say Dennis. I can't remember who it was. Who went on to do some good YouTube stuff, actually. And they had a falling out at one point, I think, when this guy realized oh, Tim is odd. And but I don't know. And but at the time Tim was just shooting the camera.
Oh yeah, Tim guest lectured at NYU course for one day that I had, which was a value for money there.
Have you tried? I was gonna say, have you ever done a calculation?
Yes, it was about $450 for that class session.
Dude, wow! On the same company that has an Abu Dhabi campus.
# get Matt's money back.
Go Violets.
That is legitimately not cool.
Also, folks, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off of your coffee. It is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Michael has ended his vow of silence. He is now speaking.
Beep.
So laid back.
Tomorrow, guided meditation. And
God, you're so sleepy now.
Yeah. And we're gonna try to be Indian instead of urban on the show now. As a big change in focus.
That's
on
the binary.
Yeah.
It does contain several large cities. Is that what you mean by urban?
Yes. No more L.A.
We got to send.
No more New
we got to
York.
send Michael away for another week where all he does is talk to get
Well,
him back. To get him back.
Just show me the Dave Rubin video. I couldn't even take it.
Go on a week-long riffing retreat.
Oh my! We are
10 a.m. Come by the rec hall. We'll be playing videos of all the right-wing shows.
This is what we do every day. So
right,
I'm
exactly.
here.
That's what this is.
I'm back in the riffing life retreat of the Majority Report and TMBS. Hassan Piker makes his debut. We are, in fact, going to be talking about
tonight
Dave
at
Rubin.
7:30. Barry Weiss will be here, and we're just going to have an opportunity where everybody's just going to get up and
just
try to
remind
make fun of her.
It's like
Gonna braid
Nando
each other's hair.
Vila just tweeted me a tweet of Steve Pinker quote tweeting Andrew Yang saying that we need to acknowledge that people's genetic predispositions influence their politics. And Steve Pinker was like something to the effect of, amazing to see a candidate acknowledging these genetic predispositions. And Nando was like, this is designed for @_Michael Brooks. And it's like, yes, to totally piss me off and remind me of how utterly fallen and messed up our world is and all of the people I truly don't like, including, I'm sorry, Andrew Yang. Meditation has not made me softer on Andrew
We have
Yang.
no tradition in this world where people focus on genetics.
Yeah, no,
it's
it's just
There's
totally
no
it's
tradition
totally
of that
gone.
whatsoever.
It's totally gone.
I love that with everything going on, I'm going to have to learn about twin studies now.
And then I also loved Adam H. Johnson's, the sheer energy it takes for him to not openly come out as a race science advocate could power Las Vegas for decades. But anyways, this is all true and getting me back into the riff zone. And then Milton Alamati, who is an amazing journalist, who editor of Black Star News, is going to come in, and we're going to talk about Uganda, Libya, and a whole bunch of others that we have a huge amount to get to. So 7 p.m., we're back live tomorrow. For patrons, I just want to let people know that the second video illicit history has been released on the history of Medicaid and states' rights with Jamila Michener. And then also the first one that was they're going to be behind a paywall for a month for Comrade and above patrons because they're what's making it possible to invest in it with Vic Viana. But after a month, we release it publicly on YouTube because we want it to be like early advantage for patrons, but then everybody watch these things. So that illicit history of Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition, I couldn't be more proud of. And I didn't actually know this, but Ryan Grimm has a new book out where he covers some of the same terrain in the modern history of the Democratic Party.
He's going to be on the show.
He's going to be on the show? Awesome.
Am I right? We have him. Don't we have him plugged?
I'm sure. So, and then Bill Fletcher
week
Jr. Bill Fletcher Jr. Is the featured person on this, and he worked on that campaign and was a strategist for the Rainbow and is brilliant. And so go check that out on YouTube, and also the illicit histories of Hezbollah and conversation on capitalist realism, patreon.com/TMBS, and see you tomorrow.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, remember when me and Sam got in an argument about where neoliberalism came from? And Sam thought it was mostly the result of bad people who had some bad ideas and enforced them. I thought it was largely overdetermined by a crisis of capitalist accumulation that continues to this day. Well, turns out we were both right. That's
so nice when that works out.
That's right. This week on History as a Weapon, number 4, we have released part 2 of History as a Weapon on the 1970s, featuring Matt Chrisman of Chapo Trap House, wherein Matt and Sean finish their extended look into the 1970s by answering the questions: why did Carterism fall apart over its internal contradictions? Where have the politics of personal virtue taken us? Why was Reagan the man of the hour? And why was Clintonism his enduring achievement? How did neoliberalism become the economic consensus? And what the hell is happening now that its entire political and economic edifice is collapsing? All of this and more on part 2 of History as a Weapon number 4, out now for our patrons, patreon.com/theantifada.
Do you know what Margaret Thatcher said? Maybe it's apocryphal, but they asked her what her greatest achievement was. She said Tony Blair.
That does not surprise me.
Damn, those Brits got the humor. Yeah. Speaking of Brits, on Literary Hangover for patrons, second episode of Orwellers coming out. George Orwell's episode "Such Were the Joys" about his time at St. Cyprian's Preparatory School as a kid. It wasn't printed in his lifetime because it was too libelous. Indeed, there's a Orwell commented to his publisher itself saying unprintable, libelous until a bunch of people are dead. And what's funny about it is Orwell gets a lot of, everyone's like, oh, Saint Orwell, he always tells the truth. He lies about a lot of people, even like without changing their names for a political purpose. He's trying to basically say that schools sending your kids miles and miles away leads to abuse, which it does, and we all know it does. But Orwell definitely exaggerated it and used real people's names to it. So it's kind of interesting. Orwell, the propagandist.
Orwell, the messy bitch.
All right, folks.
Definitely time to Patreon for that.
We'll take a quick break. Fun half, 646-257-3920. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen, of the program. Welcome to it. And here's a guy. Got to wonder why they let him out of the office to do interviews. And sometimes
Talking
those,
about Jonathan Swan.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, sometimes those insiders cash in some of their chips. And now you don't know exactly what precipitates something like this. You don't know. Maybe it suggests that maybe where this guy's getting his information from is somewhere other than Jared Kushner, and there's somebody else in the White House who not too displeased that he did this. I mean, who knows? This is all speculation on my part. One can never know, but it's always fun to watch someone like Jared Kushner squirm a little bit. And
to the degree that his face can make expressions.
Right. It's true. There is like a quality of like, it does feel like he has been sort of like just wrapped in gauze, and then they let him out for a little bit. But here he is. This is Jonathan Swan on Axios' show on HBO. Yeah, I know. Interviewing Jared Kushner about his daddy-in-law.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she has called President
I'm sorry.
Trump
I know
racist.
people hate it when I interrupt a clip 30 seconds in or 4 seconds in, but we should just go back. I thought it was worth noting that that Swan introduces this question attributing this to AOC because nearly 55% of the country probably has said at one time or another over the past couple of years, Donald Trump's racist, but he attributed it to AOC. I guess that maybe, I'm not sure exactly why, but we always like to peg something to someone famous because it gets clicks. So go ahead.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she has called President Trump a racist.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen him say or do anything that you would describe as racist or bigoted?
So the answer is no, absolutely not. You can't not be a racist for 69 years, then run for president and be a racist. And what I'll say is that when a lot of the Democrats call the president a racist, I think they're doing a disservice to people who suffer because of real racism in this country.
Was birtherism racist?
Look, I wasn't really involved in that.
I know you weren't. Mm-hmm. Was it racist?
Like I said, I wasn't involved in that.
I know you weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Was it racist?
Look, I know who the president is, and I have not seen anything in him that is racist. So again, I was not involved in that.
Did you wish he didn't do that?
Like I said, I was not involved in that. That was a long time ago.
The other issue that often gets brought up in this conversation is that he campaigned on banning Muslims. Would you describe that as religiously bigoted?
Look, I think that the president did his campaign the way he did his campaign.
He did,
and I think
but you wish he didn't. Do you wish he didn't make that speech?
I think he's here today, and I think he's doing a lot of great things for the country, and that's what I'm proud of.
There you go. Boom.
I just love it's so obvious, but like, yeah, I would say if somebody had not had a racist record for 69 years, that would actually be a pretty strong indication.
Well, to be fair, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a couple of times where the DOJ had to give him a consent
Yeah,
decree
I was
because
going
of
there.
racism. So he had 69 years minus a couple.
I will
couple of
admit, 1971
Really,
got a little
technically,
racist.
67
There was another
years
Yeah.
of not racist.
60 out of 69 years is pretty good.
And-
I'm going to say that by 88, when I'm sending flowers to Robin Givens, pretending I like Jesse Jackson, it's a
Now,
pretty good
also,
year.
to be fair, and then, of course, there was that whole Central Park 5. But if you just, so 67 minus a day, so 66 years and 364 days. To be fair, Jared can't remember because it was so long ago, all of the birtherism. And so he's discounting that too.
Where was he at Columbia at that point?
I just love the idea
I
that
think he was already graduated.
Yeah, I love the idea that he's just going to sit there and say, what's weird to me is that he's got the gumption to say, this guy's not racist. Like he hesitates for a moment. But he's
He
like,
almost said unequivocal or
Yeah.
something like that.
yeah, well, okay, I'm not going to go that far. He's not racist. And then he can't just say like, no, I don't think the birtherism was racist. I think he was just asking a question.
The best spin by
How
far.
can questions be racist?
He was just
He's
betting.
no Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I'll say that
Well,
much.
no, of course not. And then the other thing is like he picked up on his Dave Rubin by saying like, the problem with saying that his racism is that it takes away from the power of racists who might like actually lynch somebody or shoot somebody. Like we need to be on guard for that. If we start saying that you're racist just because you're promoting a racist ideology, then people are probably going to let the stuff like where people commit murders because of racism, they're going to let that slide. That's the theory there, I guess.
What's the German word for a face badly in need of a milkshake?
Milkshake and Wanton.
They gotta have one.
Milkendeutscher.
Just wondering.
I also he just, you know who had the best spin about this Trump's racism was, and as you know generally was the case, Omarosa was great, and she's like, he's racial, not racist. That was really good.
Good distinction.
Because that was no, exactly, that had a superficial, that had like a dumb person's idea of a smart person's
exactly
appeal to
right.
it, where it's just like you could see people riffing on that for weeks. Like, no, it's racial.
All they're really looking to do for is to make you have to stop and think about it for long enough for them to make
no,
the
and
getaway.
that worked in that, and that totally worked.
Oh, this is great. Since you were talking about milkshakes, Matt Getz, and I have friends who are from this area, Pensacola, Florida. Yeah, I think he's around there. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz was leaving a town hall in Florida. This happened over the weekend on Saturday. And Gaetz is one of these guys who's willing to say just about anything. Now,
and go on InfoWars.
And this is the way that he is making his hay in Congress. This is why we know his name, frankly. You know, there's 435 Congress people get elected every 2 years, which is my understanding.
Shout out Business Insider.
Yeah, thanks for that tip. We never talked about that story where the editor of Business Insider, the world editor or something, you know, it's a big world. It's a big portfolio. Apparently did not realize that Congress people were elected every 2 years, and all of them had to run for re-election.
Seems like a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So Matt Gaetz, the way that he stands out, the way he tries to build his career, whether it's going to be a post-congressional career in politics or in business, whatever it is he's got to be there. Now, one of the things about Florida, always hot, nothing better than to cool off with a delicious milkshake. Here he is leaving his town hall in Florida. Oh, and there's the milkshake.
It sort of goes over his shoulder and onto his hands.
Oh, and then he's got the cop and he's pointing to where it came from. Whoa. Yeah, there it is. Over the shoulder, gets onto his hands. That's actually, frankly,
it's a nice spiral.
That is a beautiful pass. I mean,
yeah, that's the NFL.
People might say, "Oh, it's not appropriate to throw milkshakes at congressmen," and that's a separate debate. But you really got. I mean, because look at that. He goes over the defender's head,
exactly,
which is the police officer, and it lands right into Gates' hand.
Hits him right in the head.
Yeah,
he drops it.
Drop ball. Totally drops it. Doesn't do that. But that's really well done. I mean, in terms of a toss. I mean, you gotta. And are we clear that that's a milkshake or is it soda?
An unspecified drink is what I'm seeing reported.
Anything could be a milkshake if you believe hard enough.
That's right. There you go.
The woman who threw it, I believe, has been charged with battery. So
there you go.
Know that that's the price you might have to pay.
Right. Unless you have the classic, like, ugh, I spilt my milkshake. I didn't mean to do that.
And you know what's funny is if this meme gets widespread enough, you can start to just have your milkshake near some of these people, and they'll be nervous enough, and you won't even have to throw it.
Right.
It's also a good way to save on calories, you know, because the second half of the milkshake never tastes as good as the first half anyway.
Always hard to deny yourself the full milkshake.
It is too much dairy, though.
And then also, look, there's also spit takes. Now, I'm not recommending it, but it is quite possible that you could be in a situation where you're drinking your milkshake and let's say a certain politician is a little fascistic, says something that just blows your mind, a spit take is a very natural reaction that one could not. It's like
involuntary.
Involuntary, exactly. That was the word I was looking for. Going to the phones, calling from a 206 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Priya. I'm calling from Seattle.
Hello, Priya. What's on your mind?
So I was just calling. I guess I had a question, as well as about Nancy Pelosi and this whole, not impeaching thing. And
yep.
I was wondering. Someone said this at some point, but can we impeach her, or not impeach her, but do something that puts she has some skin in the game? Because at this point, her biggest concern is ostensibly, purple districts, if that exists, but really it's, her donors. I mean, I don't know what she's doing or why, but it feels like she needs to have some consequences.
What makes you think it's her donors?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like why else? What would she be doing? I don't exactly know what the hell is going on. I just think that it's so delusional and so removed from reality.
I mean, it seems to me. I'm not saying that it's not her donors. It's just that I would be surprised if it's her donors. Maybe it is, but I haven't seen any reporting to that. I mean, it's a much more obvious, seems to me, answer is a combination of trying to protect those members in a purple district and just general temerity and learning the wrong lessons from history, and making a calculation that it'll be easier to ignore the calls for impeachment than to respond to them. I mean, if you want to impact Nancy Pelosi, very unlikely that you're going to get a movement to impeach her. I think more likely to call your various representatives and tell them you want to go forward with impeachment inquiries. Because that's going to put pressure on her. Look, I mean, today, Clyburn over the weekend came out and said that he thinks impeachment is, that we can move on with impeachment, that the House is going to eventually impeach Trump. To me, look, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said it seemed like Nancy Pelosi was turning. And
right, that's what,
to a certain extent, they're zigzagging, but this leads me to believe that that's what's happening. This is the way it would happen. The leadership would start to say the stuff, float it, and this is the way it would happen.
Can I add something really quick to this?
Okay. Okay. Well, sorry. Because I was just wondering if there's a mechanism where people, because I feel like even in the caucus, she is known for having a really strong hold on her caucus, and nobody even, everyone has to kind of go along to get along kind of thing. And even whispers of that, someone saying, you know what I mean? Just getting that narrative out on a populist level or on a, on a whatever level, I feel
Who's your congressperson?
To give. Village Jayapal, I think.
Oh, yeah. Jayapal is probably, where is Jayapal on? I haven't heard.
I'm going to guess she's for it.
I would imagine, but I don't know.
I would assume she's for it, but I don't know if she's vocal. I don't think she's, said it formally or something. I mean, she
says start the beginning of it.
Yeah, she says start the beginning of it. Well, I mean,
okay, yeah.
Every call that Jayapal gets is going to get logged. And when Jayapal says to Pelosi 3 weeks ago and 3 weeks from now, gives a reason to impeach, if she says the calls are increasing, I'm getting more calls. Mm-hmm. And if you have someone who, who lives in a district, in another district, call them and tell them to call their congressperson. I mean, this is the way it will happen. It will simply, polling has shown that Democrats have, the number of Democrats who are interested in impeachment has gone up by about 4 points from when it was at its low. And part of that, I think, is that when Pelosi came in, they tamped down the impeachment stuff. And so a lot of Democrats just do what they hear. And now it's becoming more mainstreamed. And so, and so that's the way it happens.
Can I just add real quick? Priya, you give me just 30 seconds. I think with Pelosi, my read on her is that when you look at like her healthcare advisor, who's undermining Medicare for all as an example, and some of her other, or PAYGO, that's where I would look at her donors and that sort of angle on where she fits. I think impeachment is a genuine, I don't think it's right, but I think it's a strategic position that she's learned from her experience. And to be fair, it's quite a bit of experience. And unlike a lot of other prominent Democrats, some of it's successful. Like she actually has led to some victory. She isn't just like, able to elect herself and pretty much fail in all other regards. But so I think the angle of approaching her on impeachment is very different than in other areas where she really is, in my view, definitely just like a corporate 1% Democrat or whatever. That's her donors. That's the more, interest and ideological thing. But I think impeachment is totally just strategy. And if she could be moved and convinced, I bet she'd move.
Oh, yeah. Nancy Pelosi is at bottom opposed to single payer health care. She is not opposed to getting rid of Trump. I promise she wants to get rid of Trump.
I think
Trump's not going to go away with impeachment.
No, it's a question. And I think that's the other big thing is what, because he's not going to go away. That's the question is it politically effective to go through that process and have him get acquitted in the Senate? Does it humiliate him and stoke our side? Or is it, so enraging that you have like a 1998 effect with Clinton? And I'm sure that that's what's preeminent in her mind.
Definitely. Well, last word, Priya.
Someone made the point that, they're already energized. Like, I don't know what she thinks is going to happen, but they are already energized. And we've seen what happens when we are not energized. And I don't see how you can take the lesson that we have the biggest win in Congress, and like her highest poll ratings ever was when she, basically shut Trump up with the shutdown. Like, I don't see how you take these lessons and get them so incredibly wrong. But it's just like,
I mean, Priya,
I'm like,
I agree with. I mean, that someone I think was me who said about the Republicans are already motivated, but it's not. Look, it's not insane to look back in 98 and say Bill Clinton's numbers went up. It's not insane. I think it's a misread on the situation at the time, and I think it's a miscalculation. But it's not insane. But I think what she needs, this is one of those perfect situations where it's like, if you called in and the numbers of Democrats who want him impeached was at 95%, and there was 45% of Republicans, or 50, 65, 60% of independents, then I would say there's some type of Manchurian candidacy going on here. Why isn't she doing this? But we're not there yet. And so if you want to really drive this, hold on, Priya. If you want to drive this, that's what has to happen. You need to move public opinion. I appreciate the call.
May I just add too? I think yes. Not only my read on impeachment is that not only are they're already totally motivated. I don't think it makes any difference with them, and the types of like people who may or may not vote or persuadable. I frankly don't think it affects them one way or another. I think it's going to come down to pretty bread and butter stuff.
It could, but I really think. I think there could be definitely a certain amount of that. I don't think impeachment is a slam dunk in terms of helping. But I think what is really clear is that not impeaching has far more danger, because not only do you risk demobilizing the Democratic base, but there's also this notion of like, we're not at the election now. There's 14, 15, 16 more months. 17 more months. You create a vacuum, there's going to be a real problem. And Democrats have nothing to fill the vacuum with. all the bills that they had arranged that they were going to pass that are not going to actually get enacted anyways have been brought up. Apparently they're running out of bills. Which is ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
But nevertheless, there's only so much that can happen. I mean, they passed that, what do you call it? The HR 1, which was a huge omnibus bill covering all sorts of like corruption and all sorts of different things. They had Medicare for all hearings over the past couple of weeks, barely made a blip. The point is, you're going to create a vacuum. You can bring up postal banking and pass it. You can bring up this and pass it, and the press is not going to pay attention. The public's not going to pay attention. None of it's going to be enacted. They wouldn't even do those good bills.
I think even in addition to those, they should.
But my point is that you're going to create a vacuum, and the way that's going to get filled is the DOJ is going to start investigating, whomever. And Trump is going to be on offense the entire time.
I think they should, I think they should keep stacking those votes both on the merits and also definitely on a bunch of things that can be more like narrowly tailored to create really bad votes that will make good campaign ads. But is the other point you're making that like it's also there is something, and this is a question I think particularly for people who are, frankly less disillusioned with with the process, which is like, if people are basically institutionally saying that we're just not going to do that, then just embrace the fact that you are basically saying that we should run essentially just on an election majoritarian model and that nothing else really matters because you know what I mean? Like, look, if you're going we can beat him in an election and that's sort of it. But there are other mechanisms in our system if somebody is like,
I'm not even making the ethical.
I know I'm not.
I'm not even making the ethical.
No, I'm trying to make just add to also the institutional point that I think you've said it's like you use it or you lose it.
Right. No, I'm not even making. I'm just making a pure political argument in this instance.
Yeah.
Is really just like, if you're not dominating the headlines with the only thing that could dominate the headlines now, right? Which is public testimony, inquiries, series of updates on the inquiry. We have this, we have that. We're developing now the Democratic staffers say they're developing 6 instead of 5 impeachment indictments or 7. If this isn't there, nature abhors a vacuum.
And were the Iran-Contra hearings really... I mean, they didn't impeach Reagan over it, but I have a sense that in the last couple of years of his administration, his approval ratings did start to tumble, and he's at least publicly remembered for those, even like in pop culture. And a lot of it was because they were on TV, and it was like, oh my God, you have all these like crazy criminals and like quasi-intelligence operatives running these illegal wars for you. That was a very effective. I mean,
plus,
it needed to happen, but it was also really
for the
smart.
General election from a political
media
standpoint.
Strategy.
It's a dry run for the general election. Like, certain themes come out there in terms of like all these different articles of impeachment that you would be formulating, and you'll get a sense of what's going to stick in the media on some level. And we should add, the Benghazi hearings were a joke. They were a joke the first time. They were a joke the second time. They were a joke the third and fourth and fifth time that the separate investigations happened with Benghazi. But they ultimately led to the email scandal that ultimately led to, in many respects, the Comey letter. There's all sorts of stuff that could come out of these things. You never know, but.
Well, on the tip of being scared that it would like shore up Trump's base because he could like say, oh no, I'm being persecuted by the radical left. Like, he's going to do that no matter what. He doesn't need an excuse to do that.
I don't think he'll do that. I think that if they don't impeach him, he's a guy who only talks about his victimization when it's actually happening.
I don't want to overemphasize.
Just like to praise the restraint of Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, there's been times where she's bad, but there's other times she's really great. Hey, speaking of 2020, you know who's still in the race? John Delaney. What's that? Who? Who's John
making
Delaney?
his big "Let's acknowledge who John Delaney
Is
exists"
he the Twitter
debut.
comedian?
John Delaney? No,
Wait a second. If John Delaney,
Is he on the Kroll Show?
John Delaney, the pro NSA guy who used to act on an Amazon sitcom, maybe that could be a good cabinet member.
John Delaney is a former healthcare executive. He is a former congressman too. I didn't realize that.
But he's still a congressman.
No,
he quit.
He was in California. Where did he
Represented
from,
Maryland.
Maryland, and but he went on to make $230 some odd million is his net worth or something to that. I'm not
Because he's smart.
Smart guy. And he got in. Was he the first person to declare?
Yes.
Okay. Which puts lie to the phrase, sometimes first to market isn't, maybe it does prove first to market is not necessarily always the best position you want to be in. But, however, all that said, John Delaney has outdone himself. He shows up at the California Democratic State Convention 2019, and he thinks, how can I get any coverage? Oh, I know.
But we need, as Democrats, to build an economy that works. But it's got to be with smart policies. Medicare for all may sound good, but it's actually not good policy, nor is it good politics. I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
They're telling you to.
We should have universal health care.
Literally sweaty palms.
We should have universal health care.
Free money for everybody.
Universal health care.
Yeah,
we should have universal health care, but it shouldn't be a kind of health care that kicks 150 million Americans off their health care. That's not smart policy.
That's not particularly smart analysis either.
And he lies too.
Is that smart politics?
Well, I mean, it would kick 176 million off their health care onto a better health care
Right.
system.
I guess. Okay. I should say not lying, being highly
Right.
misleading.
Well-
I also love the when he keeps saying, "I'm telling you," and it's like they're telling you.
You don't
That
want to listen.
People are both. That telling is going both ways, brother.
This is what my dad used to tell me. We're looking at policy. You don't want to go from the frying pan onto the plate. Well, there's something like that. Anyways, I mean, that is.
Do you have like former health
Do you
insurance
think-
industry people just indulging his fantasy to get less than 1% because he just wants to run for president?
One has to wonder, like, he's going out there and he's like, I've got to break through the noise. But darn it, that was a little too much.
At least people know who he is now.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
He finally
I
went
had
viral.
totally forgot that guy was even running, and now I know.
It's funny to see in real time the phrase "we need universal health care" become completely discredited in the minds of an audience, because he was trying to do that to bring them back, and they're like, yeah, we don't believe you, you asshole.
Right. Like, yes, we've heard it is amazing how that is. That's why I was saying, like, in the middle of it, he just goes, all right, fuck it. Free money for everybody, all right? Do I have you people back? Who here's from California? Anybody?
He goes, psych, rips off his jacket to reveal a Che shirt. Sorry.
I was
No, I was
joking.
being an asshole.
The
whole reason I'm running for president is because I worked as an executive in that parasite industry, and I have to make up for it. You know, if he Wendell Pottered it, I wouldn't vote for him, but I'd give him a couple of nice segments.
How awesome would it be if he just said, like, guys, joking. Joking.
Guys, look, I know I'm not your first,
Oh my
second, third,
God.
fourth, fifth, or sixth choice, but I'm not a total asshole. You think I would come to the California Democratic Convention filled with committed grassroots activists who care about human well-being and tell you that single payer was bad policy and bad politics? Come on. Have a slight amount of respect for me.
This is how awesome would it be?
Even though I
if he's
look
just-
like a sort of crooked accountant in a Coen Brothers movie, could you give me a little credit?
they've got, like, they're in their strategy session saying, like, oh, well, let's see if you can just go and prove to your donors that you're just willing to walk away from California. Oh, they've got a lot of electoral votes, or they've got a lot of delegates, whatever. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 512 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Austin.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Tammy.
Tammy in Austin. Welcome to the program, Tammy.
Hey, Sam. So I was listening to your interview with Dissident Peasant.
Yes. Okay.
The Lost Aughts.
Yes. Thank you.
I recommend it to everybody because it's sort of like he does with you what you do with authors, and it's for younger people a really. I'm your age, Sam. For younger people, it's a really good kind of review of that period. But I wanted to.
Did I
at the
hesitate?
beginning of the show today?
Tammy, have I plugged that on the show yet? Did I?
I don't think so.
Oh, all right. Well, I got to do that tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow.
If you did, I didn't hear it. I listened on Friday. I didn't want to make this call on Friday because Friday was,
I understand.
Well, anyway, I didn't want to. I get nervous before I call, but I just at the beginning of today's show, you did some corrections, and I'm not a hater. I listen to the show. I've even called in before, but there was one mistake, really glaring mistake that I took pretty personally about your interview with Jeff in Georgia. Here's what she said, word for word: no blogs, nothing. It just felt so isolating. There was no dissent. There was no avenues for dissent. There was no blogs. There was nothing. This was you talking about the 2000 election, the lead up to the Supreme Court decision, and the fallout afterwards. Where were you living then, Sam? Were you in Cali then?
I was back and forth between New York and California.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to say is there were blogs, and there was dissent. I know because one of the blogs was mine. And we bloggers were actually sort of networked together. People like Bart Kopp, who anybody our age
I remember Bart
would
Kopp.
remember. Rose had Fringe Folk. She had What I Did in the War. There was Jamie. I forget what the name of her site was, but she had her Democracy Dog with her. We were at the Federal Building constantly. We marched in the streets of L.A., but more importantly, we
in 2000
combined our efforts with, yes. Janine was there. Ask Janine.
In 2000?
She was there. Yes.
Okay.
And I had a site called, well, it went through a lot of names, but I eventually settled on a really short one, which is Coup2K. Coup like coup d'etat, 2K like 2000.
Okay.
Coup2K.com.
All right.
It got a lot of traction. We did a lot. Well, just this is what I want to say, because you said you were back and forth between the East and West Coast. In the little bit of time we had from the inauguration of George Bush, and by the way, our blogs did post videos of how people responded to his inaugural parade. We did. But all of these bloggers all over the United States cross-posted each other, had links to each other. Our blogs weren't just blogs. They were calls to action locally and nationally. We had merch. I would go to the Federal Building and people would be wearing my shirts, right? But here's the thing. In the very short time we had, with the very limited resources that we had, no Twitter, no Facebook, none of the kind of megaphones that you have now, we managed to put together a bi-coastal voter march in March of 2001, 2 months after he was inaugurated, less than 2 months after he was inaugurated. Rose from California flew all the way to Washington, D.C. to speak there. I flew up to San Francisco. I was living in Southern California. I flew up to San Francisco to speak there. We got incredible turnouts on both coasts. We made it where George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, nobody from that administration could go into any city where our blogs had a presence to do anything without having protesters outside. And a lot of them were wearing my T-shirts and Rose's T-shirts. And what I want to say is, because our blogs existed before people called blogs blogs, we've been written out of history. And I know you didn't mean to offend or anything, but in your interview with Jeff, you wrote us out of history again. A lot of those sites are gone now because they were hosted on, hosting platforms that crashed when the internet crashed in the late 90s. I was lucky enough to be offered digital immortality by Mark Perkel, who also hosted Brad Friedman of Brad Blog and Bart Kopp and all these other people our sites will never disappear. They will be there forever, and they are the history of that time, which was an important time. It was before Netroots Nation, but we were active. We were real.
Okay. I apologize, Tammy. I was not, I knew some of those blogs in 2002 and 3. In 2000, I imagined that there were, but I think like in terms of the impact, but I don't mean to write you out of history, and we have corrected the record.
Thanks for listening, and for all of your viewers who don't live in Texas and are lucky enough to live in a blue state, I just want to let you know that Texas decided to stop licensing plumbers. So now, if you live in Texas, you get the fun of having somebody come to your house saying they're a plumber to hook up your gas and your water and stuff like that, who maybe has never ever plumbered before.
Wow. Well, that's got to be that's going to be quite an adventure.
Yeah, it's going to make for some real fireworks, especially when it comes to the gas lines.
Oh, jeez. All right, Tammy, I appreciate the call. Hang in there. Thanks for the correction. I appreciate it. I stand corrected, ladies and gentlemen. Stand corrected. So John Delaney got up, and it's almost like there was some A/B testing on messages at the California Democratic primary. John Delaney got up and said, Medicare for all is bad policy. You got to love when someone sort of speaks with the condescension of like, you guys, it may sound good to you, but you're not looking at this with any type of depth. Medicare for all is bad policy because all these people get kicked off of their health care, and we want universal access.
Well, he doesn't even realize that it sounds good to them because he calls it bad politics as well.
Well, he says it may sound good. He said it may sound good to you, which does belie that notion that it's bad politics, because if it sounds good, why would it be politically bad? But the way that he was that condescending about it, like, you don't understand the details of this. Now let me just give you really one of the most moronic quarter-inch deep reasons why we shouldn't do Medicare for all. So that's the A test. It didn't work out so well. That was the boo. Let's go to a B test of another message. This one delivered by Bernie Sanders at that same California Democratic Convention. Now, I know that all sounds good. But it's bad politics, folks.
There's a bunch of enraged grassroots Delaney supporters holding middle ground and policy signs.
I want a smart policy sign.
A smart policy sign in Bernie's face.
What about the smart policy?
What about the smart policy? The outpouring of the grassroots.
This is bad policy.
Bad policy, Sully. Bad policy. It's bad politics.
And
I drove out here in my used Honda to say that as a grassroots normal person who's in no way beholden to the health insurance industry.
And by the way, it is great that he said that about abortion. And I would like to see people hold up Bernie's policies and his stances on abortion against Biden's and then try to call Bernie supporters Bernie bros.
But you don't hear that as much this time around, do you? I'm not hearing the Bernie bro stuff that much.
If you follow Zerlina Maxwell on Twitter, you might.
I have not. Well, I think I do follow her, but I don't see it as much. I just don't think that's going to be the theme. I think the it's Biden is the one that people. It's not like. I mean, part of the problem is that Biden support is almost explicitly Biden bros. I mean, that is almost the one of the big selling points. But as I mentioned, as we get closer to the debates, we're starting to now see the outlines of the tacks that people are going to take. And if I'm Joe Biden and I'm on Joe Biden's staff, the one thing I'm doing every day is I am praying that Joe Biden is not on the same stage as Bernie Sanders, but particularly I am praying that I am not on the stage with Elizabeth Warren because of Elizabeth Warren's profile, because of what actually drew her into politics as opposed to policy, largely Joe Biden and his agenda. And so if I'm Joe Biden, everything I'm doing now is I'm getting voodoo dolls. I'm getting, I'm doing all the things that you do to like throw salt on your back.
Did you ever
voodoo
doll Mark Green?
Oh yeah. So that Elizabeth Warren is not on stage with me. And here I think what we're starting to see is going to be a preview of what she's going to be doing during the debates. And we're going to see a lot of people start to train their fire on Joe Biden in one form or another. But the question is, how explicit is it going to get? How quickly? And here is Elizabeth Warren at that same California Democratic State Convention.
And some Democrats in Washington believe the only changes we can get are tweaks and nudges. If they dream at all, they dream small. Some say if we all just calm down, the Republicans will come to their senses. But our country is in a time of crisis. The time for small ideas is over.
So that's the beginning.
Hi, Joe. She sees you, Joe. Also, incidentally, not only the time for small ideas or delusional thinking about Republicans, maybe also being a bagman for the credit card industry for decades wasn't so hot either, brother.
Oh, that's coming.
Go at him by name, Liz.
I know she's sequencing it. I that's very fun to watch her lay that out.
I want to skip to the part where she's actually using his name.
Exactly.
Yeah, precisely.
Calling from a 306 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Jeff from Regina.
It's what? Who? Jeff from Regina. Jeff?
Sorry, Jeff from Regina.
Jeff from Regina. What's going on?
Not much. I wanted to talk to you about Medicare for All or universal health care. I was just curious. In Canada here, where I live, basically it got passed when a couple of provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, kind of got together and developed a plan and implemented it, and then it was very successful, so the federal government saw that. Several other provinces joined, and then kind of through a process like that, we had universal health care throughout Canada. So I was just curious if you thought that's a path forward for America, where like if you had, Florida and if say California, New York, passed universal health care, would other states be able to jump on and eventually, would that be a path forward for the U.S. as well?
It does. It's that model is the analog. The analogy is not perfect, okay? Because, if you get a big state like maybe like California or New York, Florida maybe, but it's just hard to do. You need to expand the risk pool. To a large extent. And it's just, there isn't necessarily the money there in these states to be able to do it. You can try and you can add to it. If you had help from the federal government, which you won't get during a Trump presidency, you might be able to do it. I mean, that was certainly the hope when the ACA launched. Was there was a contemplation that Vermont would have single payer. The governor there did not prep, and I specifically remember John from San Antonio calling in about that, saying they're not talking enough about the raising of the taxes because it's going to come as the shock to everybody when it gets introduced, and they need to sort of ease people in and explain this dynamic. Now, Bernie has done that. I wouldn't know how to quantify it, but people's understanding of that dynamic has changed dramatically in the past 2 or 3 years because of Bernie's campaign, frankly. It's conceivable. But, you know, the problem is that so much of this is ideological. It would be helpful, though. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but it's not going to have the same import, you know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Vermont tried to do it and then they got cold feet. California and New York have sort of like sniffed around it a little bit, but really more what you're going to get is just sort of incremental expansions of various programs. So I think it has to happen nationally. There can be different, like, sort of pilot programs, different places, but ultimately it's going to have to be something that's national. But I appreciate the call.
No problem. Thank you.
We talked about how that developed, I think, in Saskatchewan with Guy Lawson one time back. I can't quite remember. Let's see. Calling from a 314 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Give me 1 second.
What?
Take your time.
All right. This is Fake John in St. Louis again.
Fake John?
So, I was just wondering.
Did you say
yeah.
Fake John?
Yeah.
Okay.
I called in before. We talked about whether or not a government was necessary for a central government was necessary to issue currency. Anyway.
Here goes my
yeah,
meditation
so I just
retreat.
noticed that you... what was I thinking? Sorry. Yeah, so I was just wondering, you guys sort of use the term neoliberal relatively pejoratively, and I'm not sure that the term is necessarily deserving of that. I mean, I think it depends on
Well, that's
what
consistent
exactly
with
someone
your
means.
ideology. It's consistent with our
so if you
ideology that it
actually-
is pejorative.
Well, so that's the part that I'm not necessarily sure about, right? So, because like you could get someone like Paul Krugman, who you could certainly describe as a neoliberal, but you can be sort of pro-universal health care, pro-welfare state, pro sort of social democracy, and simultaneously think that there should still be free trade and.
Well, no, neoliberal. I mean, the way that I think, you know, neoliberal has had a very big loosening of its definition. But I think ultimately, from my perspective, what it means is you see the market as the premier and in many instances the exclusive mechanism to deal with the distribution of income, with the distribution of services and production, and that all answers lie with the market. Now you have someone, and I don't know if specifically if Krugman subscribes to that, but there is, you know, broadly speaking, liberals will call for mitigating the government to mitigate the cruelty, if you will, of the market. And I think maybe I think that mitigation of cruelty is good. I think that also, you know, sort of an ideology that is cruel is probably, that's a first hint for me that it's bad. Now, I'm not saying cruel in a pejorative way. But if you take it that way, you can take it. I mean, you know, like, so, yeah, I mean,
No,
I don't.
that part makes sense.
But also,
I just think that. Go ahead, Jamie.
A thing that people don't realize always about neoliberalism is it's not just about letting the free market do its thing. Neoliberal governments are extremely active in taking measures to prop up the market at the expense of human needs.
Well, the other element of this, and if you really go back to like Mont Pelerin, these guys like Hayek and von Mises and whatnot, although Hayek and von Mises had a split between them about this, and I can't remember who was who on this, but
Hayek was probably better.
That the idea was that not only should we just have the market, but we should also, yes, have government function to support the market in that way, and sometimes certain players. And they also have an international scheme, too, that would limit the sovereignty of and be anti-democratic, specifically, so that markets can function without the constraints put on it by governments or liberals or whomever.
And that's actually a really good way, because your example of free trade really illustrates that, because the objection to trade agreements, whether they're NAFTA or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are based not on some like platonic idea that like, oh, one region grows barley and another one grows flowers and they should be able to like, send ships and planes to each other and trade goods, right? The objection is that these rules are written in such a way, in a highly bureaucratic, highly top-down, highly governmental way, in fact, highly bureaucratic way, to favor the interests of financial services industry, pharmaceutical companies, specifically at the expense of labor, the environment, and consumers. So even just the frame of, calling those agreements free trade deals is actually quite misleading.
Not very accurate, right?
It's highly misleading.
It's a bit of spin.
Capital can move, but labor can't.
Labor can't, and standards are specifically universally set. Now, in my ideology, I support setting universal standards, but I want to do it on behalf of labor. So my objection is not to the notion of some forms of universality, but they aren't just local and loose and everything flows. They're bureaucratic and controlling, and in that sense, neoliberal.
But what with that said, I don't know. Do you perceive that as being pejorative?
So yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all the things you're saying. I just don't. So like earlier, for example, when you were giving the like Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair sort of or analogy. And you were essentially labeling Tony Blair as a neoliberal, right? Or like sort of third way politics as being a product of neoliberalism. And I think a lot of those, right? But the British still have a universal healthcare system. They still have a lot of public
goods. But they're
goods.
literally, just historically, they are literally a product of neoliberalism, because even the ones, third way leaders, not Tony Blair at all, but Tony Blair is a politician of the right. But someone like Gordon Brown, who is Blair's partner, who I do think did absolutely want to do what he conceived of as his best to save some forms of social democracy in that economic climate, the whole project of the third way is accepting all of the fundamental assumptions of the Thatcher-Reagan era and then saying, can we preserve a few slices?
Yeah, how do we let a little air out of the tire?
Yeah, so it literally is a product of neoliberalism, and that's definitely not pejorative. Maybe this is what Sam is right. It's overused, but that's like a historical description of where that politics comes from. Anthony Giddens, who was the intellectual guru of these guys, would acknowledge that first and foremost.
Yeah, it's okay. What I would say is I think that when you're using the term, maybe be a little bit more explanatory, because you guys.
Well, there you go. We did it.
We just did it. Right? Because you can include everyone from like Hayek and the Chicago economists to Paul Krugman, and those guys like basically can't stand each other. You put Krugman in a room with.
Well, I mean, but wait a second. But
destroy each other.
All right, here I would say two things. One, I do think the term is overused. It's thrown around to just mean anybody who somebody disagrees with on the left. That happens quite a bit, like on Twitter and whatnot. But it's also possible that Krugman and whomever hate each other, but they do share a similar, they're operating on the same plane in terms of the way that they look at the economy. It's just that they have different ideas about, what should be done, whether, one person, you can have one neoliberal say, yeah, the market dictates that people don't have health care, and guess what? They're shit out of luck. They should do better in the marketplace. Krugman can say, well, the market is such that people aren't going to have health care. So as a society, we're obligated to, provide some type of safety net, as it were.
And maybe market mechanisms to help it happen,
or even non-market mechanisms. But the idea is to preserve the market. And the way that we preserve the market is, to add this sort of like we have a little bit of a backstop. I mean, that is... those people both, I think can both share a neoliberal perspective, but have different ideas on how to maintain it and hate each other for it. And that's still, we're just talking about a different thing where we would abandon the market in this office at, various rates and different velocities and different distances. But we're all very... I think comfortable doing that.
But that is part of the tricky of that word because it's totally overused, but it also is like another fact that we are in a neoliberal world. So we're all neoliberal to a degree. That's been the template upon which the whole world has operated for decades. Anyway,
it's like when Nixon said we're all Keynesians now,
Right. That's what it's been like.
Right.
Anyways, thanks
to the
for
extent that, the underlying economic assumptions are in there, like rational agents and somewhat efficient markets and that stuff, I agree. But I think that you can get there are people who would say the government should supply food and clothing and housing and things like that.
John, we're going over the same territory.
Oh no! I'm sorry. All I wanted to say was that if the government provides all that stuff, then if the free trade agreement does impact the labor market, you're talking about someone loses their job, but you're not depriving them of access to healthcare or food or housing, things like that. So then, you could be a neoliberal, and that's all I was saying.
Okay.
But okay. I think I agree with you now that I better understand what you're referring to.
That's what we wanted to get to. Appreciate the call.
That was a very neoliberal call.
I
mean that in a pejorative sense.
No, I think he came around.
No, it was a good call. It was a good call. It was good.
And if we didn't clarify them for him, we certainly did for other people.
So you remember a couple of weeks ago, we played a clip of a billionaire going to a Morehouse college and announcing during his speech, and it's always the last refuge of a guy who can't come up with a really catchy speech, and that is to, at graduation, that is to pay off all the loans of everybody in the audience, and everybody's walked away. That's the best speech I've ever heard, and the guy didn't have to really say anything.
Yeah, cheating.
A little cheating. But if you got it, flaunt it. That's what I always say. Anyways, and you'll recall that we suggested that this is problematic, and insofar as that it identifies the problem, but offers not even a Band-Aid, almost like a tiny Band-Aid. Like a Band-Aid doesn't even cover the actual gaping wound, but it identifies the problem, but then gives a false solution, which sets us off on the complete wrong track.
It sort of does a mission accomplished sort of routine.
Exactly. It in fact lets the air out of the tires, but we still have the problem of the air in the tire. And here, apparently, Fox News had a slow news day, and so they circled back around on Anand Giridharadas' criticism of this. I don't know why it took them 10 days to get to this, but apparently they had a slow news day, and they're like, remember the ratings that we got about... Now, you'll recall the original clip, Kilmeade not only, sort of made it out, accidentally recognized the problem of student debt by saying, all these people, it's going to be great for them, but also then accidentally read off the story of how this billionaire attributed his success to the busing program that sent him to a good school in a white neighborhood. Kilmeade could not get past the opportunity to extol the virtues of white people without realizing that he was actually extolling the necessity for busing and the problems inherent with our the way that we fund public education.
And segregate it.
Yes. But here they are circling back around to criticize the criticism of this.
Wow, billionaire Robert Smith's incredible generosity under fire, believe it or not. Right in the New York Times saying, quote, "A gift like this can make people believe that billionaires are taking care of their problems and distract us from what other ways which others in finance are working to cause problems like student debt." Our next guest responded with a new op-ed who's afraid of Robert Smith's philanthropy. Wall Street Journal columnist, Fox News contributor Jason Riley. Jason, how could something so nice be perceived so negative?
Well, it's a sort of sign of the times here of how polarized we are. Every act gets to be politicized, even acts of generosity like this. And this was just a very generous thing to do. About 400 college graduates says, "I'll wipe out your student debts." And instead of just patting this guy on the back and saying thank you, he becomes a target of criticism.
Right, because all these kids get their student loan pays off. It doesn't solve the problem of the fact that there's tuition.
Right.
And income inequality.
Pause it for 1 second. Like, all I can
Good
think
job,
about
Brian.
when I see this.
Wait, Brian's on it here. It doesn't solve the problem of tuition or income inequality.
But all I can see is like when I see this, it's just like, wow, everything is so corrupt. I mean, just like they're doing this segment 10 days later. The guy had nothing to write about. He's making up basically that Giordano's actually criticized the guy
As an
individual. Like, oh, he should be getting a pat on the shoulder. Instead, he's getting, he's getting pied essentially. Like they can't even like honestly look at the critique itself, and it's so desperate and so. But continue. I love it.
Pays off. It doesn't solve the problem of the fact that there's tuition.
Right.
And income inequality.
And he's a billionaire. He's the wealthiest black man in America.
Self-made.
According to Forbes. Right. Comes from a pretty modest background. Started out as a chemical engineer, got into investment banking, and then started his own private equity firm about 20 years ago, and has been tremendously successful. And he gives away a lot of his money, and this is one of the ways he does it. College scholarships. Now he's paying off student debt. He does a lot for inner city kids, exposing them to nature and music and so forth. And he's in a long tradition of wealthy philanthropists in this country, going back to John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and Julius Rosenberg, Rosenwald, who ran Sears Roebuck back when it was the biggest retailer in America. They all gave back. They all gave to communities to help the less privileged, particularly educational causes. So I hope he ignores these critics because he is in very, very good company.
Wow.
I think he just identified a bunch of people who created enormous societal problems.
Yeah.
And then tried to wash away their brand
But
problem
even if
by
they
giving...
didn't, I mean, even if they hadn't,
that is Giordano's point. Well, no, right. Even if
they hadn't
true.
caused these problems, even if there was some way where a billionaire could amass their money without it being indicative of a larger structural problem, but they themselves somehow garnered all this money.
Well, my point is being a billionaire is that
well,
structural
yes,
problem.
I understand. But even if somehow it wasn't a structural problem, but it is, even if they had amassed their money in a way that was completely benign, and hurt no one and denied no one of resources in some way, which I think is probably impossible, but I'm just stipulating for the sake of argument. The criticism is still valid. The criticism is a structural one. The criticism is all the things that are positive about what this person did is really an argument for how detrimental the rest of the debt is for the millions of other people. And we're just staring in the face of all this potential benefit that could come from this. And the only reason why at the end of the day we're not offering this to other people is because of those people who have all that money and don't want to lose it in some fashion or another. Now, Elizabeth Warren made the point the other day, 2 cents on every dollar, over $50 million on that wealth. It wouldn't lose that much, but it would pay for all that stuff.
Well, Comrade Kilmeade gets it.
He does. That's like Kilmeade's like segment, like Rachel Maddow used to do one like talk me off the ledge or talk me down segment. This is Kilmeade like save me from myself.
Talk me back to the right.
I have a conscience. Can you help me?
Send me a lifeline.
When I just sort of think through things on my own, I realize it's kind of messed up to commit genocide against the Iranians, and we need to do something about wealth inequality. Can we get a guest to help me out on that?
Now, look, we haven't talked about Kristen Gillibrand's run for office on this program since probably the day that she announced. And we're not alone. I think everyone has not talked about her campaign since the day that she announced. But it's not necessarily a statement as to who she is as a person or even as a politician necessarily. It's just that it's hard to see a reason for her candidacy in light of all the other candidates that are running. But with that said, not as bad as Beto, who actually could have something else to do that would be helpful for the things that he's ostensibly running for. But be that as it may, we have a bunch of Democrats who have gone on to Fox News. I think that I think there's an argument that they shouldn't be doing this. I think there's an argument that they should be doing it. I don't feel terribly strongly about it when it comes to people running for office, specifically as a group doing it. But they all have felt obligated, as they should, taking the opportunity to crap on Fox News and in various different ways. Kristen Gillibrand decided to do that, and it's interesting. I don't recall the other candidates off the top of my head. Buttigieg, Sanders. Has anyone else appeared on Fox News, Democratic candidates? Getting the pushback that she gets here. Now, I don't know if that's just because, like, they can't allow this to happen this time.
They realize a pattern.
Or they realize a pattern, or if it's like it'll be easier to do this with a female candidate, because I certainly know Fox's formula. Those older viewers, those older male viewers love to see younger women get admonished on the I mean that is I can assure you
it's
that is
basically
literally
porn for them.
Literally a formula. That is what they call in the business a macro. So I don't know if that's what was going on here, but I thought Gillibrand did a pretty good job, and I thought Wallace was about as craven as I've seen him in a long time on this. Here it is that Fox News Town Hall, Kristen Gillibrand and Chris Wallace is hosting, and somebody must have said to him, like, look, if you want your bonus this year, you better do some work for us.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I am a retired nurse, pediatrics actually, so I dealt quite a bit with preemies. What I'm asking you, Senator, is what is your position on late-term abortion or last trimester abortions?
Well, thank you for serving our community and helping our babies, particularly our preemies who deeply need the medical care they have. My view on women's reproductive freedom is that it should be a woman's decision to make these most intimate life and death decisions for themselves. A woman should be able to decide when she's having children, how many children she's having, and under what circumstances she's having. And what we have created, unfortunately, is a false choice and a false narrative. And Chris, I want to talk about the role that Fox News plays in this because it's a problem. I can tell you, before President Trump gave his State of the Union, Fox News talked about infanticide. Infanticide doesn't exist.
Senator, I just want to say we brought you here for an hour. We have given you, we're treating you very fairly. I understand that maybe to make your credentials with the Democrats who are not appearing on Fox News, you're going to attack us. I'm not sure.
Pause it for 1 second. I want to go back,
no,
nothing close to this. I mean, this is unprecedented with these. But I mean, think of what he's stipulating here that is unsaid as he says, we invited you here, as if like they want it both ways at Fox. We're just a news organization. Like as if they've really gone out of their way to prove that we're not partisan, that we have you here. Well, why do you need to do that? Like, it's not like a news organization's like it's a favor, right? Like, no, can you imagine like NBC saying like, we've done you a favor by allowing, no, of course not. It would be weird for them to think it. It's only because everybody knows in the universe that Fox is, has been, will be basically the Republican communications arm. And so the fact that they invited her here is a big concession on our part. We're even getting in trouble with the president. And so just go back a little bit because, I don't know, that stuck out. But go ahead.
That maybe to make your credentials with the Democrats who are not appearing on Fox News, you're going to attack us. I'm not sure it's frankly very polite when we've invited you to be here.
I will do it in a polite way, but it's to her point.
Well, I just think why don't we instead of talking about Fox News, why don't you answer Susan's question?
The debate about whether or not women should have reproductive freedom has turned into a red herring debate. And what happens on Fox News is relevant because they talked about infanticide for 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours, right before President Trump's State of the Union. Mentioned it 35 times. That is not the debate of what access to reproductive care is in this country. It doesn't happen. It's illegal. It's not a fact. And I believe all of us have a responsibility to talk about the facts. The facts are that women in this country have had a constitutional right for over 30 years to make this fundamental life and death decision. And this president has emboldened legislatures in 30 states to begin to criminalize that decision. Criminalize the decision of whether or not and when you want to have your children. Criminalizing the doctors with a 99-year sentence if they are offering abortion services and providing the care that women need. Why should male legislatures across this country decide when you're having children, how many your children are having, and under what circumstances? I don't understand it. It's a human right. It's about having bodily autonomy. It's about being able to control your physical self. It's undermining every human right, civil right that we could have. So let women make these most personal decisions. For many people, it's a moral decision. For many people, it's a medical decision. So why can't they make it with their doctor, with their families, with their husband, based on their own faith, how they believe and what they feel? It is that woman's right.
There you go. I mean, it might have also been worthwhile for Gillibrand to say, you're a pediatric nurse. Do you guys commit infanticide? Do you think that's legal?
How many infanticides have you done?
Right, exactly. I mean, but it was interesting that that Chris Wallace was like that motivated.
Pathetic.
I mean, it could be that they
cash.
I mean, Bernie was more gentle about it, but he dunked on them, and the audience and Buttigieg hit them. Well, that's what I'm saying is it escalated with each step. So there must have also been a signal from the up top of like, the next candidate that comes out here and reminds us that we're a fascist propaganda organ, you better, and also it goes to his whole self-concept that he doesn't, because clearly he's invested in the idea that even though he's on this horrific propaganda network, that he shouldn't be subjected to that sort of questioning. But
so we made
it's
up
just
to think about
incredible.
Infanticide. Whatever.
It is extraordinary though to just say like it, because she's made the point well that it's not just like you're promoting anti-choice policies, you're lying in the most extravagant, flagrant terms hours a day on the highly rated cable news network. I think that does have some effect on our politics.
Well, but it got a very good answer out of her, I must say. Like, I was impressed with the performance that she gave. I think a lot of people see her as kind of an opportunist who goes wherever the wind blows, and that may be true on some issues, but not on this one.
Right. No, I agree. So there's a lot of back and forth with Iran right now, and it seems like things have calmed a little bit. Pompeo is out there saying that Jared Kushner's not going to get us Middle East peace.
What?
And yeah, I know. Disappointing. Everybody should not
really
have,
banking on that.
I should not have bet my kids' college education fund on that trade sports line. I knew that the odds were just so good, though. I couldn't help myself. But here is an interview with the Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif, Mohammad Zarif, and basically what's been going on here. And there was a report the other day that former Obama officials were basically trying to send message to Iran, don't take the Trump bait. There's two different dynamics that are happening. Obviously, Iran has domestic politics as well as the United States. The United States, it appears that there was basically on a level just below Donald Trump. Donald Trump had sort of just accidentally appointed a bunch of people who wanted to have a war with Iran. And when he found out that, oh, wait a second, all these guys are trying to have a war with Iran, I don't want a war. I really honestly think there was like a moment in a meeting with with Pentagon officials where they said, well, President Trump, the likelihood of a conflict with Iran is increasing. And so if that is your agenda, what? No, I don't want to do that. I just want to be tough. And, well, they said, well, there's probably a danger here, and maybe you should signal to them that you don't want to actually have a war. Okay, I don't want a war. I just want to be tough. And meanwhile, Iran is like looking to exact, they need to also show that they're tough in light of all of the sort of aggressive steps that the Americans are taking. And this is the fear that everyone has on both sides, that those who need to posture will accidentally stumble into a war. And so Iran is still on this mission. And they came out and said basically, with an assist from North Korea, that John Bolton is dim and a problem. But it's not going to end there.
President Trump says he wants to talk. He has invited Iranian officials to give him a call. How likely is that?
It's not very likely, because talking is the continuation of the process of pressure. He is imposing pressure. This may work in a real estate market. It does not work in dealing with Iran.
If you did come back to the negotiating table, would you trust the United States? Would you trust President Trump?
The last experience was not very optimistic and does not provide an optimistic perspective for a future agreement. So this is what I believe is happening to the international community. That is, people think twice before they talk to the United States because they know that what they agree today may not hold tomorrow.
Now, this is not just, I think, telling in terms of someone who we perceive as an adversary. I think this is probably true of all the international leaders. I mean, it would be absurd of them to think otherwise. And it's, we've said this many times before, but even if you were to get our next president was to be this sort of very gracious and institutionalist and less belligerent individual who had no drama and whatnot and came to office, as a foreign leader, you still have to say, like, there's something wrong with this country. I mean, electing Donald Trump after Barack Obama and then electing blankety blank after Donald Trump, let's hope, all that says to me as a world leader, like, this country is unreliable. There's something wrong with the people there.
And what it says in an Iranian context very explicitly is, I always say this, but it's important history that when the supreme leaders signed off on doing this process, and that's a bad translation. It's like he is the ultimate authority, but people like the president and the foreign minister have actual power. And that was part of the, there was momentum to do this, and he signed off on it. And he basically said, you can do it, and it will never work because the United States can fundamentally never be trusted.
And so he's just cashing that every
I know this
day.
is conspiratorial, but doesn't it seem like they're working together? Like, not working together, but like their purposes are aligned.
There is a huge convergence of interest always between the right in Iran and Israel and the United States.
Well, this is true
and everywhere.
Of all, yeah.
You know, but particularly particularly in how, you know, their enmity affects their domestic politics and their foreign policy. And
you could have said the same thing with like Castro and Bush. Like, I mean, and other U.S. leaders, but like the way Castro was, you know, going to maintain power is like there's an outside threat. I mean, this they all love that. It all, you know, this is the the last refuge.
Although sometimes, you know, and this is when it's like, look, like Castro, they did want a deal and they made it with Obama. And that's another thing Trump ruins that we pay less attention to. But that's another huge setback of Trump. And the right in Iran, as demonstrated by the supreme leader, or I should say, what's ironic is Iran actually has a center right, which is really kind of what Rouhani's a moderate. And there's a center right that was willing to pragmatically go for this. Ahmadinejad wanted a deal.
Sure, no.
And so, you know,
but these aren't mutually exclusive.
Not at all. No,
ideas.
they can go both ways.
The worst case scenario
That's right.
for someone like that is to have an administration that doesn't necessarily want a deal, but is not going to preen about it.
Absolutely.
Then you have nothing politically to sell domestically. It's just you're ineffective. You're ineffective at getting a deal when you know you want one. If the other party is, you know, doing something that's belligerent, then you can come back and just stir nationalism. I mean, that is the. All right, we have the final call of the day, calling from a 504 area code. I'm sorry, folks, did not have all the time we wanted to. 504 call. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
Yes, it is. You're the final caller of the day.
Sorry. Okay. My name's Jeff, and I'm calling from Louisiana. I just wanted to thank you real quick for saving me from the Jimmy Dore vortex.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
And that was a close one there. I just wanted to talk real quick about impeachment. I just seen what you thought the effect of that was versus like the Kavanaugh hearings. Like, was the Kavanaugh hearings? Was that like an ill effect on like the 2018 midterms, at least as far as the Senate was, and how that would affect just like how that effect goes?
I mean, look, it's hard to say what the net effect of the Kavanaugh hearings was. I mean, there's an argument that it activated people. The counter argument to that is, we just saw the greatest midterm, the greatest midterm victory by any party in terms of actual votes that we've seen in our recorded history. So it's hard to say that the Kavanaugh hearings hurt the Democrats. If there's a state where you could show that changed the trajectory in terms of like the Senate race, I'm not aware of it, but I think to the extent that you had someone like Heidi Heitkamp come out, maybe that was sort of like a Hail Mary. But I also think it's a mistake to equate the Kavanaugh hearings with what the impeachment hearings would look like. You know, the analogy would be more like, we're going to impeach Donald Trump because of the 14 women who came out, or 20 women who came out with charges of sexual assault against Trump. This is going to be a very different, very, very different scene. And I don't think that really, you know, with Kavanaugh, the question was, are you going to get this guy on the Supreme Court? The question with Trump is really going to be if it's set up properly by the Democrats. The question is not whether Donald Trump is going to remain in office. I think if the Democrats are smart, they enter in and say very explicitly, whether Donald Trump will remain in office will be a decision by the Senate Republicans. But we're going to make a case to the American public that he is unfit for office and see if the Republicans agree with the American public. And that's what impeachment means. It doesn't mean getting him out of office, because that's going to happen in the Senate. And that's going to be up. That's Mitch McConnell's decision. Right. But so I don't know that it's an apt analogy. And it's also, I don't know if you can assess really.
Well, I think another effect the Kavanaugh hearings may have had, considering the fact that a lot of Americans probably don't realize that impeachment absolutely will not remove Trump from office. Like they think that maybe it could, is it made people more fatalistic about things. It showed that these people, the right wing, which is currently in power, can get away with whatever they want. And our system of checks and balances doesn't work on them. So I think in that sense, it's probably made people cynical about impeachment along the lines that they understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I agree, like, as far as, like, impeachment. Like, I think they should just do it, just for the sake of, like, rule of law. Like, they just need that some people need to be held accountable.
Right.
But I was just kind of curious about the Kavanaugh stuff. And just real quick, I just wanted to see if you had any advice for, like, 'cause I'm in a deep red state, like so deep red that the Democratic governor, signed off on an anti-abortion law.
Right.
So I was just seeing if you had any advice as far as like electorally, or just like activism wise. But as far as for anybody in those kind of states,
right.
Democrats. So just thanks for the call.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate the call. I would say the best thing is to move. No, I'm joking. I just wanted to say that. No, I think, look, you gotta build locally. It's a very difficult situation, but everything is a dynamic, and if you have the impact of weakening, people's perspective there on certain things, then you're still adding to the general welfare.
I heard a friend of mine who is in strategy said once, he had a great image where he's like, what you need to do is you need to find the tip of the spear. And like, it's like the most effective thing to dislodge somebody else's position or to introduce the idea or product or whatever it is. So, I just wonder, like, when we give advice like that, because obviously you would know infinitely better than us, but it seems like in certain places, like in West Virginia, it was teachers, like that. There's energy there for strike, for populism. So where do you think might be the most persuasive area for people to really respond to a left message in the face of what they're dealing with? Maybe it's abortion. Maybe it's I just noticed a story real quick that a governor, I think in Tennessee, new disclosures that he was behind the scenes working with Volkswagen to suppress labor union organizing. That might be a whole other layer of making people angry about something they weren't paying attention to before.
All right.
Also, I will say there are unique challenges to organizing for the left in red states versus blue states. And I don't know this person's political orientation exactly. The Socialist Rifle Association might be a little too radical for them. I don't know. That does exist in large swaths of the South. But also, like, there is a DSA in Louisiana. There are several different chapters in different parts of Louisiana. And in red states, it's sometimes easier for a real progressive or Democratic socialist to win a Democratic primary and actually speak to material interests of the people. So there is work to be done.
Well, if the Democrats can't keep Republicans out of those seats, they're not going to keep DSA people out of them either.
All right, folks, that's it for the calls. I'm going to do 10 IMs and then get out of here. Attorney Andrew, you may have covered this at the beginning of the show, but what is everyone's opinion on why Warren dodges on Medicare for All? I know she's a co-sponsor of the bill, but on the campaign trail, she doesn't run on it, and she always pivots to lowering costs through a number of solutions while bringing everyone to the table. One theory is that Massachusetts is home to like every health insurer. Another is her less than socialist tendencies. I don't have an example of that off the top of my head. I would say both those sound possible. It's also conceivable to me that in the context of the primary, she just doesn't think that it differentiates her enough. I don't know.
I still think a false belief in process and not having a grassroots strategy.
Well, the funny thing is that from a process standpoint, she is less of an institutionalist than even Bernie is.
Yeah, on certain things. I've never seen that on healthcare, and maybe that is where some of the local state interests do start to come in. The same reason that she always votes for military increases because of Raytheon.
It's also conceivable that if you think you're not going to get through the primary, or until you get through the primary, you wouldn't want to alienate those people, but it might have more value to do it afterwards. I don't know what the calculation is. Also, Buttigieg's idea to pack the court to 15 judges, yay, while acknowledging the judges have partisan leanings, but then saying that we should give 5 seats to apolitical judges by picking the other 10 is peak liberal nothing matters except finding a solution that changes nothing.
Isn't he supposed to be the smart candidate?
Oh, he is for people who are so totally up their own asses. It was horrible. Ugh.
Colin from Nebraska. Hey, MR Crew. My congressman held a town hall last week. Unfortunately, my question on climate change wasn't asked. Luckily, someone asked him about this. When will the U.S. colonize the moon? The congressman said he's not sure we will do that, but he's glad that the private sector, Jeff Bezos, is going into space research. #priorities.
No.
JJ Cool. Not
Leave
to reopen
space
the
alone.
impeachment argument, but Cenk puts forward the argument that Pelosi is against impeachment because they want to fundraise off of Trump. Do you think that has legitimacy? I don't know why you wouldn't be able to fundraise with all the stuff that would come out of impeachment. That doesn't make sense to me. Also, I think Sam has milkshake or paint on his arm. Paint. Disco Stew. Data for Progress pointed out that the number of progressives who sat out the 2016 cycle was greater than the Trump margin. Yeah, wait, did you get me that thing? You were going to pull that for me, that Data for Progress thing. I don't see it. Oh, maybe I missed it. Yeah. He doesn't do any titles on his thing. That's the problem with that stuff. It never comes out printed. Am I reading this wrong, or does this data really validate the Bernie bro issue, or perhaps the success of the Russian propaganda effort on the left? Well, I don't know if I would say. Look, both and more. I mean, recall, and I was certainly guilty of this. People were telling him like 99% chance that Hillary Clinton's going to win, and I think a lot of people were like, "I'm not going to go out and vote for that." But
it wasn't the margin also decisive in the number of people who didn't vote either way? They just left it blank for president?
I think so.
Yeah.
New Human. Looks like it's time for the 90s rags to riches sports comedy come back. Major League Baseball general manager sees an Antifa milkshaking and puts them in as a starting pitcher. But it was really more of a football throw. Ivana Tinkle. Donald Trump Jr. just liked a video where it shows a fight between a white and black kids in high school, and it's been presented as a fight between races and political affiliations. It has no audio, just a fight to spark commentators about right-wing wanting to express their Second Amendment rights.
He did that about a fight in the UK, I think, too. I can't remember.
It's weird. Stalenate just took your advice and asked Westboro Baptist Church protesters if they wanted my milkshake. Didn't throw it, just asked as I drove by, just in case they needed a refreshment. Frank in Buffalo, how nice of John Delaney to sack himself at the California Democratic Convention for Joe Biden. Biden would have received those same boos if he talked about health care. Pajama Boy, hey, did you guys see that little kid who raised $22,000 in Texas fund the wall? Nothing like drinking hot chocolate in Texas in June to own the libs. Space Bear, John Delaney is Twitter lecturing the left on booing. One night lemonade stand. Alan Dershowitz spoke with Michael Tracy about Mueller's statement last week, impeachment. Tracy also asked about Bernie and whether a first Jewish candidate nominated from either major party would give the Dersh any happiness or contentment. Dersh proceeded to label Cornyn an anti-Semite and identify Sanders' support of him as utterly disqualifying. Dersh explained that a Jewish candidate supporting a British so-called anti-Semite would give new meaning to the self-hating Jew, and made a point of describing Sanders as being born to a Jewish family. It reminded me of both Dershowitz's opposition to Keith Ellison as DNC chair, who he condemned his association for Louis Farrakhan, and Ben Shapiro's whole Gino spiel. MV Scott, impeachment should be used as a campaign tactic for 2020. The fact that Pelosi doesn't get it is sheer incompetence indeed. Winnipeg Craig just asked for wondering, Regina is the capital of Saskatchewan, which is our equivalent to Georgia. So Jeff from Regina is kind of our Jeff from Georgia. Also, did you say you did an interview with a Canadian guy named Guy? Way to play the stereotype, buddy. FIF picks. Fossil fuel companies likely need to be nationalized for decarbonization. Democrats should lay the groundwork now for when the time comes, indeed. And the final I am of the day. Space Invader Joe. Hey, guys, like Joe Biden, I'm from Delaware. Was wondering if you could talk about another fellow Delawarean, the horrible Chris Coons. I've mentioned in the past that he wants to get rid of he wants to bring the filibuster back. He wants to bring it back in the Senate.
Let's bring that back.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in